Hey, what's up? Picking up where we left off last time, we had just gotten the food into the esophagus. Here we see the bolus of food moving down the esophagus, peristalsis, of course, contraction behind the bolus of food, relaxation going to be happening in front of it. We're going down, going down, going down. Right here, the cardiac sphincter is closed. As the bolus of food arrives, the cardiac sphincter has got to open, and we get into the stomach. Look at the esophagus here. We just went through the esophagus. Esophagus looks collapsed because when food is not in it, it is collapsed. You don't want too much excess air going down your esophagus. Do notice the esophagus has a normal structure. It's going to have a classic mucosa. The mucosa has a stratified squamous epithelium. Then we're going to have a nice submucosa. We're going to find some submucosal mucus glands in there to lubricate the passageway. Then we got the skeletal muscle on the muscularis externa on the outside, inner circular, outer longitudinal. And what's interesting about the muscle in the esophagus is that the upper third is skeletal, the bottom third is smooth, and the middle third is actually a mix. So we see a transition going on there. All right, last but not least, there is an adventitia on the outside of the esophagus. The adventitia anchors the esophagus to surrounding organs, not surprisingly, the trachea, among others. Okay, now we are on and we are in the stomach. The stomach is an enlarged segment of the digestive tract. That hints at its function, the largeness of it hints at its function. Its function is the storage of food. We also see in an open stomach the presence of rugae. Rugae are folds that unfold. They give your stomach expandability. So major function, food storage. Other functions, immune defense, because it's going to be acidic. Protein digestion, because we're going to have proteases. The production of intrinsic factor. That's the one function of the stomach you can't live without, surprisingly. Intrinsic factor. We'll talk about what that means in a moment or two. If we look at our stomach and we look at the mucosa of the stomach, which we do see here, on the surface we're going to have surface cells. Surface cells are often known as surface mucus cells. They secrete an alkaline mucus, which is going to help us deal with the stomach's inherent acidity. And what we see here are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 openings in the stomach's surface. Those are gastric pits. Gastric pits come on down and branch into gastric glands. Gastric glands make gastric juice. Inside the gastric glands, we do have some more mucus cells. They're not very important. And we have parietal cells. Super important. Parietal cells making intrinsic factor and hydrochloric acid. Chief cells making pepsinogen and another enzyme. The second one here is in small amounts, so don't sweat it. Last but not least, we got G cells. These are enteroendocrine cells, gut hormone cells that are making a hormone called gastrin, which ends up going into the blood. All right, we see the same cells here again. We just did those. Let's keep going. Let's talk about our parietal cells and our chief cells. Okay, chief cells, by the way, notice how abundant they are here, hence the name chief. Chief cells make pepsinogen. Pepsinogen is the inactive version of an enzyme called pepsin. Pepsin is a protein digesting enzyme. So the chief cells make it in an inactive form, which is called pepsinogen. I know you recall how you had fibrinogen earlier this semester, the inactive version of fibrin. And here's the deal. Pepsin is a protein digesting enzyme. There is an inherent danger there. I mean, you've got cells made of proteins lining your stomach. You want to make sure you activate this guy only when you need it. So what you do is you secrete it in an inactive form, then you require the presence of hydrochloric acid, which is coming from the parietal cells, in order to convert pepsinogen to pepsin. And you're going to do this when you have food in your stomach. Okay? That's where you're going to secrete the acid, which causes the conversion. Interestingly enough, notice this curvy back arrow here. This means that pepsin catalyzes its own production. So once you make a little bit of pepsin, that pepsin promotes the production of even more pepsin from pepsinogen. So it's autocatalytic here. Pepsin prompts you to make even more pepsin, which makes even more pepsin, which makes even more pepsin. This is positive feedback at work, which gives us a lot of pepsin when we need it most, which is when food is in the stomach. All right. Parietal cells also make a chemical called intrinsic factor. Intrinsic factor binds vitamin B12, and that allows the vitamin B12 to be absorbed in the ileum, the distal small intestine, and you need your vitamin B12 anytime you're doing lots of mitosis, lots of DNA synthesis, and the most mitosis you do is in the production of red blood cells, all right, during erythropoiesis. So bottom line, if you don't have enough intrinsic factor, you don't make enough red blood cells, you get pernicious anemia, and you can die. So this is a hugely important function of the stomach. All right, what else? Well, when food hits the stomach gets stretched, or when nerve signals come down to the stomach. The enteroendocrine cells in the fundic stomach, the fundus of the stomach up here, secrete gastrin into the blood. Gastrin travels throughout the bloodstream, surprisingly enough, to affect the organ that secreted it. So gastrin is released by one part of the stomach, the fundus, then it acts on the body and the pylorus of the stomach to increase their secretory and muscular activity. Okay, here are the actions of those cells. Again, we see our mucus cells making a basic mucus. We see our chief cell making the inactive pepsinogen, which is converted into pepsin by hydrochloric acid, which came from parietal cells. The hydrochloric acid also helps us denature proteins, which is valuable immunologically as it helps defend against bacteria and viruses. If we can denature their proteins, well, heck, that's good. Also, the parietal cell is making intrinsic factor, which we need to make red blood cells. And last but not least, we see our G cell, our enteroendocrine cell, which is making gastrin, which is going down into the capillary to stimulate the stomach, other parts of the stomach, to make it more active. Okay. So what about the stomach is dangerous? Well, its gastric juice is both very acidic. I mean, heck, hydrochloric acid is a strong acid. Plus, the gastric juice has proteases in it. And those are dangerous. So how does the stomach protect itself? Well, it secretes a basic mucus, and we see that here. It also is going to have tight junctions linking the cells together to prevent sneaking through of acid or enzyme. And these cells are replaced every 3 to 5 days, the surface lining cells. All right. A little bit about the stomach's muscularis externa. We were just talking about the mucosa because we were talking about gastric pits and gastric glands and surface mucus cells. Here's the submucosa right there. And then down here we got the muscularis externa. It's got 3 layers instead of the normal 2. We encounter 2 in the esophagus, small and large intestine. Here we got 3. Inner oblique, we see that here, he's kind of sparse. Middle circular, outer longitudinal. The oblique one is the extra one. And this extra layer allows for the churning action of the stomach, the twisting and grinding. And that is going to be helpful for mechanical digestion. Okay, when the stomach is doing its peristaltic actions, it's going to mix the bolus of food with the gastric secretions to make chyme. Now, as the wave of peristalsis happens, well, right now our pyloric sphincter is closed, so everything's just mixing right now, but eventually the pyloric sphincter opens up just a little bit, and a little squirt of chyme shoots on through into the duodenum. Remember, the duodenum has plicae circularis, circular folds. Those are folds that don't unfold. So the duodenum can't stretch. Now the pyloric sphincter doesn't allow but a little bit of chyme through because he can't stretch. So then most of the chyme then bounces back and keeps swirling around, mixing, which is good for digestion, mechanical and chemical. All right, guys. See ya later.